22 years ago that we had already discovered 136 known human carcinogens just in Brussels sprouts alone, and over 100 in mushrooms, just white normal table mushrooms, and spinach, kale, lettuce, celery, cabbage, cucumber, broccoli, you name it. All of these things had 60, 80, or over 100 known human carcinogens each. And they were quite
Wow.
abundant. We've known since the 1980s from the work of Professor Bruce Ames from UC Berkeley that there are 10,000 times more naturally occurring poisons, pesticides, insecticides, natural insecticides that the plants use to stop insects and animals from eating them, to 10,000 times more by weight than the industrial pesticides that we spray on them, because the plants were defending themselves from bugs and predators long before we ever started cultivating them. And they found that, Professor Ames found that the naturally occurring pesticides, so the naturally occurring toxins in the plants, were up to 500 times more likely to cause cancer than the pesticides that we spray on them industrially. And so this is why we still have those pesticides, because they were shown to actually be less toxic than the plant itself. And so we were quite blown away by that. And I remember looking around wildly. I thought, this must be a joke. Someone must be in on the joke. But no one was. Everyone else was just as surprised as I was. And I remember thinking in my head, like, well, but vegetables are still good for you though, right? Even though they have all these toxins and carcinogens in them. And my professor just looked at us and he just sort of gave us this funny look and said, I don't eat salad. I don't eat vegetables. I don't let my kids eat vegetables.
Wow.
Plants are trying to kill you. So I said, right, I'll stop eating plants. And so it wasn't because I was sick or unwell and I'd heard that someone, you could heal these sorts of things by changing what you eat. I just learned that plants were toxic and they're trying to defend themselves like every other living thing in nature. And so I said, nope, not going to eat any of that. And so I switched to a fully animal-based diet. I started eating only meat and eggs. And that's it, because those are the only things I could find that didn't have plants in them. So I wasn't looking at, okay, I'm just going to be a carnivore and only eat meat. I went around the grocery store and tried to find things that didn't have plants in them. And everything had plants in them. Obviously, every packaged meal will have plants in it. And the only things I came across, I said, well, eggs, okay, eggs don't have plants in them. Meat's not from a plant. Like, great, okay, I'll just get eggs and meat. And I had some dairy as well, occasionally. But that was it. And so I did that for a number of years, and I felt remarkably better. My athleticism and my performance in school, as well as on the field, just went through the roof. So I was playing rugby at a very high level, and my athleticism and my fitness and my overall performance really just went to all new heights. If anyone, the people that were around me at the time would constantly comment on how fit I was and how explosive I was, because I was really much more fit than anybody else around me, even at the national level, international level. And so it was a very big game changer for me. And when I was playing at a professional level in England, that's when I started slipping off doing that, because there wasn't the same access to food, and sometimes it was just difficult to cook, and just being very busy. I was buying meat that was already cooked, but some of it was breaded or had like crumbed on it. And I remember just sort of thinking to myself, I was like, well, is it that big of a deal? It's a bit of plants, but dose makes the poison, and maybe it's not that much harm. And you can always convince yourself of a silly idea. And so that was me convincing myself. And I did actually feel worse. I remember a couple months into it, thinking to myself, like, why don't I feel as just superhuman amazing as I normally do? Am I just not working out as hard? Am I not pushing myself? Or, I'm 25 now. Am I just over the hill? Am I dying? And it's just that's it. And looking back, that's when I slipped off and started eating a little bit of plants again. But the main thing that did is it changed my mindset from I will eat no plants ever to maybe a little bit is okay. And it was a slippery slope from there to go back to just eating basically normal standard sort of diet, but whole foods, not processed foods. I never really went in for that, and always very, very meat centric, but I still incorporated in vegetables and some carbs and things like that. And then about 5 years ago, I came across information that really showed me that no, humans really are carnivores. That's just the kind of animal that we are. And like any animal in nature, if you feed an animal something that it doesn't eat in the wild, something it doesn't that hasn't been developed to eat, it gets very sick.
Evolutionary, you mean?
Exactly, yeah. So if it hasn't evolved to eat a specific food, then that food is bad for them, right? If you look at parks or zoos, there's always signs that say don't feed the animals. You feed them something that they don't eat, they'll get very sick. Okay, but they don't tell you what they get sick with. But they get obesity, heart disease, liver disease, diabetes, cancer, autoimmune issues, arthritis, and all the rest of the things that we get. Dogs and cats are known carnivores, and yet we give them grain and plant-based kibble, and they get all of those same diseases, and we call them human diseases. And veterinarians are now saying about how the prevalence of human diseases, so-called human diseases, in the domestic pet population has increased dramatically, and it's continuing to rise up. Well, those human diseases used to be called diseases of the West because we only saw them in the Western European cultures that then went out around the world and went and colonized and explored around, because these indigenous populations that were only eating meat, they did not get these diseases. Like in North America, even most parts of South America and Australia and many other places, they were not getting these diseases. Now we're calling them human diseases because just everybody gets them. Everybody gets diabetes or heart disease, dementia, all these things. They're just normal. It's just part of aging and your body just decaying. That's not how nature works. Nature doesn't, you don't just come into existence in young adolescence and then you just decay and die. That's not how it works. You'll get eaten, you'll get killed by something if you're going through that model. And so actually animals are very, very strong, very robust, and they live to be, well, unless they get killed, they live to be a great age, and then they just sort of keel over. Animals in the zoo, they're in a little box about the size of a room, and they're not fat. They look very strong, healthy, fit, and lean, and that's because they're being, well, if it's a responsible zoo, they're being fed what they would eat in the wild if they're given a choice. And so that's what I think is harming us, is that we're animals and we're not eating our biologically appropriate species-specific diet, which is meat, and that is propagating a lot of diseases that aren't actually diseases per se, but what I believe is toxicities and malnutrition, right? So toxic buildup of a species inappropriate diet and a lack of species specific nutrition. So namely, too many plants, not enough meat. And I think that as doctors and patients, we should really understand that this is not a disease process that you need a pill for. This is a toxicity exposure process that you need to remove the exposure. And I think that would help a lot of people. And in fact, when you do that in practice, it does help a lot of people.
Yeah, that's very, I couldn't agree more. And that's very interesting for me to hear it from you said like you got to it from a scientific point of view. It's not like you have some heartbreak story of a disease like I do, and that many today in nutrition world, they're trying to sometimes to find, even if it's not that true, like a story that they were a fat kid or anything. So I like the fact that you came from the field, and it's nice to hear.